Hi, my name is Niklas Pramling, and I will present Play-Responsive Early Childhood Education and Care, or PRESEC. I will present this theory briefly by introducing some of its key concepts and conceptual relationships. And I will talk about how play is understood from this theoretical point of view. This is, of course, important since the perspective is called play-responsive. Then I will give two concrete examples from early childhood education, or in the Swedish case, preschool. And I will end the presentation by summarizing some of the key points and point out some of the implications of taking this theoretical perspective on early childhood education. So this theory we call play-responsive early childhood education and care, or PRESEC. It consists of a number of concepts and conceptual relationships, and I will just introduce a few of these in this presentation. One of the keys is, of course, responsivity, and that means that the child's contributions are recognized and acknowledged, and they are consequential to how activities develop. As if is a very important distinction that I will talk about, and we also talk about what if. And then I will say a few words about meta communication, and these are some of the key concepts of this theory. If we start with the distinction between as if and as is, then we can say that this is a very important distinction in working with play in educational settings. And what we mean by as is culturally conventional knowledge, established knowledge. The kind of things that we can agree upon is that this is how it is. While as if refers to this transformation that occurs in play, where something is taken as if it were something else than it conventionally is. And this could be a very simple act of transformation. It could be that in play, the table becomes a ship, or a piece of wood becomes a telephone or something. And then it is taken, the object is taken as if it were something else than it conventionally is understood as. And this constitutes an example of what could also be referred to as a conscious fiction. And of course, play is one area where this happens, but there are other areas as well, such as fiction in literature, film, drama, and so on. And also theorizing in science could be understood as this kind of as if way of thinking. In play and when playing and setting up play and so on, participants tend to shift between speaking and in other ways acting as if and acting as is. And these kind of shifts then become very important, and they are often managed by participants through meta communication. So they clarify to each other that, well, when I say this, I mean that, or let's play. We were so-and-so and you were that person and we were on this adventure. So this is the kind of communication about how one communicates. How is these actions or these utterances to be understood? So these shifts become very important because they relate the imaginary, the fantasy, with the real, with the conventional. And I will give some examples of how this happens in everyday life in preschool. A key question, of course, when we speak about play responsivity is how is play understood? And there has been many attempts to define play throughout history. But the conclusion today is rather that it's not possible to define play in a way that is common to everything we call play, and at the same time excludes non-play and similar kind of activities such as games and so on. So for example, Garvey argues that it has become increasingly clear within the last decade that it is impossible to define play as a particular type or set of actions. And Helen Schwartzman, in another classic study, writes that if play is a mode as opposed to a category of activity, then clearly this challenges the traditional view that play occurs in a separate time and space. Because by adopting this approach, it can be seen that play can occur at any time or place. And more recently, Bert van Oers has argued that every activity can be formatted in a playful or in a more procedural way. So play is more about the way something is done rather than a particular kind of activity. And it can occur anytime, anywhere. And then the question is, how do we respond to that in early childhood education when play comes into play, so to speak? But how should we then respond to play if we haven't defined it? And how should we analyze play as researchers if we don't have a definition of what it is? Well, our solution to this is that we treat it as the participant's concern. We take the participant's perspective. And the basis for this is research that shows that only those who can indicate to each other that they take something as play can play together. So in order to play, you need to be able to meta-communicate. You have to reach some kind of agreement that what we do now is not for real. This is a way of making something up. And the participants do this by shifting from as is to as if it were. And since the participants have to make this clear to each other in order to play, these shifts also become discernible to the preschool teacher and the researchers and others. And then you can respond to play without having a definition of play because the participants indicate to each other what they take as play. Another critical issue when it comes to play in early childhood education and care is the question of the freedom of play. And free play is often used as an ideal, and there is, of course, a good idea with this. But again, Bert van Oers has made a very important distinction that takes our knowledge further in relation to this issue. And he has argued that the freedom of play could be understood as free from or free to. And it's very common that it's seen as free from adults' participation, that the personnel should not disturb children playing, for example. But he argues that more critical to the freedom of play is the freedom to take activities in unexpected directions. And we sometimes refer to this as alterity, these kind of contributions that potentially takes an activity in a novel direction. And then the question is, how is this responded to by other participants? And of course, the latter is neutral to whether preschool teachers participate or not. There could be freedom to pursue activities in novel direction with and without adults participating. This is just a very brief introduction to some of the key concepts, and I will now move on to give some concrete examples from preschools and show how these concepts could be used to understand what happens in these activities. And I will give two examples, and the first one concerns shared problem solving in the domain of mathematics within the frame of a fantasy story or fantasy narrative. And the second example concerns playing with letters and basic literacy skills. The first example is initiated by the preschool teachers. They have gathered the children, and then there is a knock on the door. And some of the children go to the door and open it, but there is no one there, but they find a letter. So they take the letter back to the preschool teacher, and then this happens. Shall I read now? Because there were these small messages. Now let's see. Can you hear? And she starts reading. Hi there, all you creepy children at the galaxy. My name is Mischievous Ralph, and I've left magical fruit for you. But in order for you to get the magical fruit, you must first get past all creepy and dangerous obstacles that I have magically conjured on your preschool. Every obstacle. At every obstacle, I've left a letter with a mission. If you do not solve the mission, you will not be able to pass the obstacle. If you manage to get to the magical fruit, you will, as soon as you take a bite, receive a magical power. And the children are really eager to start doing this. They're just jumping here. Wait, wait, wait. What power you will get when you take a bite from the fruit is up to you to decide. And then the letter ends like this. Good luck and watch out for all creepy and vicious monsters lurking around the corners. Mwahaha, Ralph. And then one of the children finds another note and picks it up. And the preschool teacher says, now let's see. Wait, wait. Back up a little. Then Gustav gets to, do you want to read, Gustav? But he doesn't want to. Shall I read the mission? You all have to find 10 round objects together. What are objects? 10 round things, kind of like this. And the child takes a doll from the paper roll. Yes, exactly. That one's mine. Listen, if you find that, you'll receive a magical power that allows you to pass the red hot stones. And then they have put these red paper sheets on the floor. Oh, can you find 10 round things together? And then we meet here. We can collect the things here. So this is how the activity is initiated. And the children are very eager to participate, so very engaged in this. So, and this activity takes place for a long time. They are engaged in this for maybe 30 minutes. So it's a very long time for these young children. And I've just shown you the very beginning of it, but it's a long activity. But what can we see in this activity then, if we take the presec perspective? Well, the first thing is that this kind of narrative framing, the story, is a good way of engaging children to participate in a shared problem solving. And within this framing, within this narrative, there are a number of challenges planted, and they concern problem solving and concepts, numbers, forms, and so on. And this actualizes conceptual questions, such as what is an object, what is round, what is oblong. And this is also very important to early childhood education, where we usually work with a group of children, that this illustrates how solving problems together is both a support and a challenge. It's a support so that you can help each other, but it's also more challenging to consider my part to your part to someone else's part to a common wholeness. So it's a support and a challenge to group. Within this narrative framework in this fantasy, children learn concepts as is knowledge. For example, what an object is, what round means. And they do this within the frame of the fantasy, this as if world. And also very important here is that the concept, the conceptual knowledge, the as-is knowledge, fills a function in this activity. They are necessary to overcome the obstacles and continue the narrative. So they're not something that you try to press into the activity that doesn't belong there. They are necessary for the involvement of the activity. But the children participating not only acquire knowledge about as-is knowledge, but they also develop their playing ability. Since when they get to the fruits at the end of the adventure, they each tell what magical powers they got, and then each child is can get a wider repertoire of what it means to have magical powers. For example, they may have an idea that magical power is that you can fly. But someone else says, well, it is my magical power is that I can be invisible, or that I can create water or whatever. So they also get a wider repertoire of as if knowledge that they can use in new plays and playing other plays. Moving on to another example, this one was initiated by the children themselves, and they start playing with something they call the letter thief. And the activity has gone on for some time, and then one of the child tries to engage the preschool teacher. She says, Lynn, the letter thief has stolen L. Lynn, the letter thief has stolen L. The thief. Yes, it has stolen your letter. Oh no. Then what is my name if I no longer have an L? Then the children speak at the same time. It's difficult to hear what they say. And she repeats the question. Then what is my name if I don't have any L? And then children say many words that start with Lin. for example, Linda. And then she says in, or lilla, which means little. So this is clearly a very challenging kind of question for the children. What happens to the name if you steal the first letter? And then the activity has gone on for a long time, and then the children try to engage another preschool teacher. The letter thief has taken your letter. Which of my letters has he taken? It. And then what happens to the name? Did you find out? Then they have these cardboard slips with names written on them. And then they put their fingers over the first letter and they try to sound out the name. A-N-N-A, Anna. And also this was just some very brief snippets of a very long activity that the children engaged in. But what can we see in this activity if we take a pre-sec perspective? Well, the first thing is that in difference to the first example, this was child-initiated. But still the children try to engage the preschool teachers to participate. They want to include them in the activity. And the first preschool teacher is responsive to the premises of the play, and this is very important, that you accept the premises of the play. That is a requirement to be able to play together. And in this case, the premise is that letters can be stolen. And she responds through confirming this premise as if it were actually the case. Oh no, that's terrible. And she also plans a challenge. So she not only listens to and confirms children, but she also plans a challenge, a real problem as is. And that is what happens to my name or the word if one of the letters gets stolen or taken away. And that's a real conceptual question. Also, the other preschool teacher is responsive to the premises of the play, as if it were. And she also plans a new challenge. Which of my letters has he stolen? And what happens then? So she indicates that any letter of the name can disappear. And until this, the children have only taken away the first letter of all the names they've been playing with. So she kind of indicates that words can be divided into more parts than just the first letter and the rest. But on this particular occasion, the children are not responsive to this very subtle difference. Still, there is a point in asking these kind of challenging questions because some other time they may have showed that they have picked up or become aware of this. The children also show that they have appropriated a strategy for solving this kind of problem. They use these cardboards with the names, then they put their fingers on and try to sound. And that is, of course, a very useful strategy in taking on this kind of problem in other situations. So it's not specific to this play. It has wider reach and is useful in the real world. It's kind of as-is knowledge. So they learn about real problems as is, how words can be divided into letters, through participating in play in this imaginary scenario as if it were letters stolen by a thief. When we talk about play, teaching and learning, it's important to remember that play is not merely a means for teaching or learning. Play has many values and it fills many functions for children. So even if we talk about play responsivity and play responsive teaching, it's important that children also get to play by themselves, individually and collectively. However, in preschool or early childhood education, where play is central and which today often has the task of teaching, it is important that also teaching is understood in a way that includes play rather than excludes it. So teaching has to be in some way inclusive or responsive of play in order to keep this good tradition of early childhood education where play is central to how we organize for children's learning and development. It's also important to remember that through playing, we also establish and nurture social relationships. So this is a very basic form of caring for each other. This could be seen in how play develops. the first forms of play is often occur in the caregiver young child relationship. For example, playing peekaboo or making this kind of dialogue, musical dialogue where you make sounds and so on, funny sounds. And through these kind of activities, the relationship is strengthened and nurtured while playing. So there is a very inherent reflexivity between play and relationship building. So through playing together, we establish and nurture social relationships with each other. So playing together is also a very basic form of caring for each other and confirming each other. To briefly just summarize what we mean by PRESEC then. We can say that PRESEC, or play-responsive early childhood education and care, means or refers to mutual activities that are constituted by participants together. So the teacher cannot teach by herself. It requires responsivity from the children. So all participants contribute to making this mutual activity. And within this frame of this activity, participants will shift between and relate as if, fantasy, and as is culturally established knowledge without ceasing to play. So the idea is not to play and then stop and do something else. The idea is for the play to continue, but to do something in play. And something that teachers do then is that they relate to and introduce cultural resources. That could be conceptual knowledge, for example, that can contribute to furthering the play. And that could be to introduce new roles in role play, to make sure that all children can participate and have engaging roles in a play. This is particularly important if you observe that some children are marginalized or excluded from play. And the preschool teacher could add new roles to this role play to make sure that these children are included. An ambition is to contribute to children learning new plays as if, and that is of course particularly important if children are marginalized or excluded, and also through playing and learning about what goes outside play, this kind of as is knowledge. What is an object, what is around, and how can words be separated into letters, for example, to refer back to my examples. In these activities, it's important that children are free to take the activity in unexpected directions, but not necessarily free from the participation of the personnel. And this also means that the preschool teachers and the children make play together. So preschool teachers become participants and co-creators of play that do not merely observe, they are participants, they take a role in the play and so on. And the ambition is to support children's agency by listening to, acknowledging, and responding to children's contributions. Children early in life experience that my contributions are recognized, they make a difference. I'm one of the contributors, I'm one of the participants in this activity. This is, of course, very important so that children are not reduced to followers of instruction that someone else decides, but they are part of deciding how an activity should evolve. By not defining play beforehand and instead treating it as the participants' concern, play becomes more inclusive because we do not make ourselves rationally blind to some forms of play. Instead, we are open to play as something that can take many, many different forms. And we can still see it because in order to play together, participants have to make clear that they are playing. So it's very important to not say that in order for it to be play, it has to fulfill these criteria. Instead, looking at how the participants agree on what they take as play, we have a more inclusive perspective on play. And one of the key ambitions with PRESEC or working but from PRESEC is that we try to make education more inclusive, try to make sure that children can participate in more ways, in different ways. And this is possible through children not having to know how it is. They don't have to have certain as-is knowledge. It's also possible to participate in terms of as if it were through giving fantasy contributions. And that is a key to creating possibilities for children with very different experience and conditions from very different conditions to participate in mutually developing activities, and therefore very critical to promoting social justice in education, to make sure that the activities don't exclude children who don't have particular experience, but allows children with different experience, different knowledge to participate in mutually developing activities. So that's a key ambition. Okay, that was just a brief introduction to this theory, and I will end by giving a few examples of where you can read more developed presentations of this theory. And there is a monography that is open access that you can download in full text free of charge, called Play Responsive Teaching in Early Childhood Education. And there's also an article on triggering in play, how you promote this kind of imaginary scenarios, how something could develop. And then there is a recently published chapter on how to educate early childhood education teachers in working from this perspective. You can also find more information about this project, the project that led to PRESEC, through these links, and you are free to contact me through my email if you have questions or comments. Thank you.